only real content is gonna last. All that other nonsense is here today and gone tomorrow.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Navigating Now. And today we're happy to have Darrien Peoples on the podcast. Darrien, first of all, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thank you so much.
Of course. And I guess we're going to get a little bit into your story, but if you could just, before, give us a short backstory on just your upbringing and how that's kind of led to what you do today.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, really kind of how I landed here, in the sportswear industry. It all really started being an athlete as a kid. Had a love for sports very young. Junior Olympics, and as I got older, got into basketball, then volleyball. Ended up playing collegiate volleyball, and of course, at that point in my life, I was also getting interested in the fashion industry, and worked retail in college. And um, once I was done with school, I wanted to find a way to marry that. And growing up in the Northwest, that being kind of the mecca for Nike, Adidas, and other companies of that industry, it just sort of seemed very natural to me. I had an affinity to the Adidas brand because they sponsored our team in college. And I just kind of knew at that point, like, this is what I want to do. This is the industry I want to work in. And so for me, it really all started with sport and that love for fashion, and bringing those together is really kind of
Right.
what launched my career in the industry.
Right. And you mentioned that there was a point where you made the decision that this sportswear industry is definitely what I want to get into. Could you take us back a little bit before that? Maybe college days, high school days. What were your kind of inspirations in the sportswear industry? And looking back, do you first see some things that you were inspired by growing up that led you to what you do now?
I mean, I think there was always a love of shoes, if I'm being honest.
Right.
You remember those moments in life where, I got my first pair of Cortez, or I
Oh
had
yeah.
saved my money in high school and got my first pair of like hiking boots that had like flashy colors of pinks, and um, where it was a practical product, but it had that fashion element to it that really jumped out at me. I'm like, oh, this is cool. So I've always had kind of this obsession for shoes, and on both sides. And to me, that was kind of always how I built my outfits as well. It always started with a good pair of shoes, and then I would build from there. So I just was always drawn to it. In terms of like individuals in the industry, or athletes or whatever, not nobody really comes to mind. I mean, obviously, Michael Jordan was, how could you not have been enamored by him, especially in his young days coming up, and Shaquille O'Neal. And I'm dating myself, of course, by mentioning them. But I think probably basketball athletes stood out to
Hmm.
me when I was kind of at that pivotal age of uh, getting to that college stage, and like looking at athletes and really watching them on TV and seeing how they would bring style to life as well. That's kind of where it all kicked off, in my opinion.
Right. Of course. I mean, I think all of us are enamored just in the American culture of sports. We just love our sports stars. So, from that decision, from all that inspiration, could you give us just a little bit more detail on the story from when you decided to go into the sportswear industry, and then kind of what companies you got into and how you built your way up from there?
Yeah, again, I was working retail at Nordstrom, and it was a great foundation, really getting to touch and feel the product and talk to customers, and, see the latest trends and all of that. But I think what really was a transition for me is when I was done playing sports, I had a friend who worked for Adidas, and mentioning that I had that connection through the sport and I already loved the brand. I hit hit it hard from the very beginning with her. Like, what do I have to do to get into this company? I want to work for Adidas. I love the brand. Besides retail, I don't have, a tremendous amount of practical skill set yet, but what do I need to do? Um, and so I really started networking. That was from the very beginning how I worked my way into this industry, was through networking. I mean, I had even told my girlfriend, I was like, look, if you don't help me get an interview, I'm going to go sit in the lobby with your name on the sign saying, I'm your friend, and she's going to help me get a job here. So I just really tried to leverage those relationships to get my foot in the door. And she ended up getting a promotion and gave me an opportunity to interview with her boss. And the rest was kind of sportswear history. That was how I got my foot in the door at Adidas, my first corporate job out of college, working as, gosh, what was I at that point in time? I think an operations manager. It was an entry level coordinator position for apparel marketing. Had no idea what it really was, but I knew I had project management skills, and it was a great foot in the door. So I just kind of took it and ran with it at that point.
Right. So you started your career then at Adidas, but you've also worked at Nike. You've worked at now you're at Adidas again. So what led you to leave? I guess if you said that Three Stripes was kind of that brand for you growing up, what led you to leave and kind of like take us through that story ending back up there now?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. I have to say, I spent a few years with Adidas in that role, and then the company went through a restructure, and the position was eliminated. And so early on in my career, I sort of got that gut punch of the reality of, corporate business. And one day you're in and you're doing a great job, and the next day the company makes business decisions and you no longer have a position. So it was a pretty heartbreaking experience to go through that. And I tried for a very long time to get back on with the brand, and it just didn't happen. And at that point in time, I said, okay, well, what are we going to do here? Let's pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and figure out another strategy. So from that point, I looked across the pond, as we call it, in the Northwest to Nike to see what kind of opportunities I could find there. And, also a very difficult company to get into, not knowing anyone, and even knowing people, still a difficult place to get into. So I actually started by temping just to get my foot in the door with Nike after being at Adidas. So I took a role as a senior admin, and ended up having a wonderful boss who was like, hey, I know this isn't what you want to do forever. What are you interested in? And so, it was really her that spent time with me to kind of pull out of me what my interests were, because I was still very new to it. I didn't really know. And I said, well, I love product. And so I want to make sure I'm working with product. And then it was like, well, what kind of product? Apparel, footwear? And at that point in time, footwear was king. And I said, well, I think I'd like to try footwear now that I've done a little bit in apparel. And so we kind of just went through this process of elimination to figure out what I was good at. And, as I mentioned earlier, project management, I'm really good at that. So that's sort of what led me to product development. And I ended up landing in sportswear, is what they called it at the time. So the non-performance footwear, and started as a development coordinator, really learning the fundamentals of how to make shoes. And then I was promoted to a developer and spent probably 8 years mastering the fundamentals of how to make product, how to work in a triad. I worked on key franchises like the Dunks and Cortez and Air Max 1s and Air Force 1s, Max 97s, so I got to touch some of the coolest product at the company and work on really cool collaborations and work with some really talented people at that point in time. Then I had an opportunity. My husband, he landed a job in California, and we said, you know what? let's go try something different. So at that point in time, I was networking through my connections and found out that the UGG brand was hiring in Santa Barbara, and took a chance to actually move to California with my husband and go to work for Deckers Corporation, is what it was called. So they owned multiple brands. And I actually started with before I went to UGG, I started with a smaller brand called Simple. They were a sustainable brand, a little bit ahead of their time. They did like car tires for outsoles on shoes. So I actually was a developer for them for about a year, and then had another amazing opportunity where the vice president of the UGG brand approached me and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about marketing?" And I said, "Well, actually, yeah, I'm really interested in marketing. It's just never really been, I never really thought it was possible. It's difficult at at least at Nike back then, it was difficult to shift from development to marketing. We didn't see it happen very often. It was kind of like once you're in your lane, you're in your lane." And so she had asked me if I'd be interested in jumping into marketing, doing sneakers and slippers and sandals for the UGG brand. So, I was a little terrified of the opportunity, if I'm being honest, because I knew you had to do public speaking. And that was really the big hurdle for me, was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to get up and present in front of people. But I said, why not? Let's do this. Let's give it a try. And it was an amazing experience to be able to shift into marketing at a smaller company as well, because the differences between, the Nikes and Adidas compared to smaller companies is you wear so many hats. One day you might be correcting copy for catalog, or you're styling for a photo shoot, or you're selecting colors and materials for products, or you're analyzing numbers and trying to build your range for the next season. Like, there's just so many things you've got to do at a smaller company. It was a real blessing to do that, and to come into this having a development background. I was also able to answer product questions that I didn't need to necessarily consult with other people on, because I had that background. So I did that for about 7 years, and was promoted within that to a senior PLM. Had an amazing time. And then, lo and behold, about 6 years ago, an opportunity at Adidas came back around. And I found this out through a friend, again, through networking, that they were looking for a director of development for Originals in Portland. And at that point in time, we made the family decision to go for it. They were looking kind of for someone with a unique background, knowing that I had development, I had marketing. Originals is split up between Portland and Germany at the Adidas headquarters. So this role took care of a portion of the range in Portland. So they were looking for a unique skill set, basically, to come in and lead this team. And, at that point in time, I hadn't really thought about going back into development, because I loved what I was doing so much. But I really wanted to take that step into leadership. So, and again, it was like coming full circle. It was coming back home to the brand that I loved, right out of college. So it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. And long story short, I feel like that was like not the Cliff Notes version, but that's how I got to where I am today.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. That's really cool. I like how, like, you made a point to kind of challenge yourself and grow throughout your career, where some people could have just taken like what was comfortable, say, oh, like, I already have a good job, like, I'm here with my family, it's fine. Like, you always continue to try to push the envelope and say, no, I want to be a leader. So clap it up for that.
Yeah. I was gonna make a note about that too, just like the tenacity of like the saying, like, successful people do what non-successful people aren't willing to do. And like, you were willing to go sit in the office at Adidas, you were willing to go temp at Nike, you were willing to give up your comfortable position, like Jay said, to go try something new. Just yeah, like applaud that tenacity, and those are the little things that people don't talk about a lot that get you to that next step and help you develop in your career. So that's awesome.
That effort is what puts you over the edge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't take no very well. I sort of see no as a challenge. You tell me I can't do something, I look forward to proving you wrong.
Yep.
Yep.
Very,
Very, very common.
My next question
among successful.
is kind of like about, you worked at Nike, Adidas, and like what was your perspective like working at both companies, especially Nike versus Adidas? Nike versus Adidas is almost like a classic rivalry. You have a very unique perspective being like behind the scenes at both, not just looking at what they make, but how they operate. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on the competition between the companies and the brands and what they're doing now, their legacy. Yeah, open floor to that one.
I mean, it's a great question, and it is real. I mean, especially, talking about Nike and Adidas, they're in the same proximity of like 10 miles away from each other, in the Northwest. And competition is real, absolutely. When I spent time at both companies, each company was always trying to make sure that they're leading, right? Um, when you're at one of the brands and you're hearing about the other one doing something really amazing, how are we, depending on where I was at that point in time, what are we doing? What's our response to that? And even more importantly, like, how are we leading beyond that? I think where I've seen when both companies are at their best is when they're not worrying about the competition, when they're doing what they do best. Nike's an amazing marketing company. They can tell the hell out of the story. And that's where they excel, And Adidas is an incredible performance company. I mean, the products that we put out for sport, in my opinion, are the best, right? So when we're staying true to our roots, whichever company it is, that's when I've seen them at their best. But you better believe they're always looking, and somebody always has an ear to what each other is doing. And each company is always striving to be the best and the best to the consumers.
Is there actually like inner competition at the companies, or does it feel like a rivalry? It's like my team versus this team? Because I do know some other people that, as well as yourself, that have kind of worked in both places and don't necessarily have an issue with it, but it's also kind of like, I'm gonna play for the Lakers and then the Clippers, whatever.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, sometimes it can be sensitive, and it can be sensitive to some people. I think probably in Portland proper, it's not as much because it's such a small industry and there's so much cross pollination that happens, right? I would say earlier on in my career, much more so. But I think, again, as people have worked in different places, and I've seen scenarios where one spouse works at one company and the other at the other. Like, there's all kinds of wild scenarios. But absolutely, if somebody comes out and does something and they're kicking your butt, you better believe teams are gathering in war rooms or whatever you want to call it, and figuring out how to respond in their own way, right? So the competition is absolutely there. I think the stigma between one or the other, I mean, it's lessened in time, I would say, but it's there. I mean, they're different companies. They have different energies. I mean, I haven't been at Nike for a very long time, and I know things have changed dramatically over the last 10 years with the big focus on new tech. What I love about Adidas is they really embody the creator lifestyle. And they live it and they breathe it. And there's so much potential for creatives within Adidas. And maybe it's that way at Nike too. I just can't speak to it today. But the way they embrace that at Adidas, it's really beautiful, to be honest. Like if you have an idea, you can go try to make that idea happen, and the company will support you and celebrate you doing it. So I think that that's something unique and special to the brand for sure.
Okay. Okay, cool. So the next place I want to kind of take the conversation is you are a developer of footwear at these major companies, Nike and Adidas. I want to understand, how do you make shoes? Just that question. So I'll start with kind of what are the steps that the shoe kind of goes through from like the initial concept, the ideation to the design. And then I have some follow-up questions, but how do you make shoes?
Well, that's a big question. I have heard in the industry that actually building a shoe is more complex than building an automobile. And I don't think you actually realize that until you step into a footwear factory and see everything that goes into building a shoe. But I'll back it up to say that the overall process takes approximately 12 months to bring the shoe to market. There's instances where you can bring them quicker, like a new concept in 6 months. And then there's instances maybe on more technical product, performance product, that maybe takes 18 or 24 months. But on average, especially on the sportswear side of the business, about 12 months is the average to build product. So the way it starts is it basically starts with marketing, right? Marketing's role is to analyze the seasons before, identify holes in the marketplace, figure out what product is working, where you might need newness. You're analyzing numbers, you're watching trends, you're looking at what the corporate goals are, where the company wants to invest, and you're basically building a range plan, right? You're building your plan for the season that's going to hit a financial target with this much product, and this is how much will be carryover, this is how much will be new. And then with the new stuff, you then, as a marketer, you build a brief to say, okay, I need to build a low top basketball shoe from the vault, from whatever, whatever product they're picking, if they're picking an old product or if it's something brand new that they want to do. This is how much it's going to cost. This is what my margin needs to be. And here are kind of some trend elements that we're going after. And with that brief, they hand it over to design and development. So that marketing, design, and development are called the triad. And that's really the core group that gets after creating the product for the season. So that brief then goes to design and development, and there's a collaborative process that happens to talk through it about, okay, can we build it for this price? Does it have technology in it? What are those special things we need to know? What's the forecast? Is it going to be a 20,000 pair shoe, or is it going to be 150,000 pair? Because those are all critical things you need to know to build the product. So once everybody's kind of agreed upon how the product will move forward, then design takes that brief and they go through their creative process. Taking, again, seasonal trends, their ideation process, and they start sketching. And then there's a collaborative process that sort of happens, narrowing down the direction, right? Development, of course, would like to see it down to one direction, but sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes you might early on have 2 or 3 directions for this idea. And once the design ideations are agreed upon, then that's when development really comes in and it gets handed over to the development team. And from that point in time, development then works either with a sample room to create products, on campus or locally, or they'll go directly to the factory and start working with the factories to get sample iterations built. And then it goes through this process of, building samples, having prototypes come back, making tweaks. You may take a trip to the factory and cram in several rounds of samples in a week or two's period of time versus like waiting for the back and forth of samples to be shipped and that whole process. And so that's what really kicks it off. Then you go into sample reviews with the larger teams and, scrutinizing the product, making sure it's coming into cost, fine-tuning all the details. Usually there's about 2 major sample reviews before it's finalized and goes to sale samples. But yeah, that whole process takes about 12 months. Usually there's 1 or 2 trips to the factory, although with COVID, we've had to learn how to do things more digitally and remotely. Yeah, and at the end of that, you have a product that's signed off and, hopefully a high margin and lots of volume and product that sells through with the consumers and, everybody's happy. You have a success story.
Yeah. So, whole lot of knowledge right there, but I'm going to keep going. You spoke on the different silos that are involved in the triad that kind of create the shoe, especially in these corporate environments. How does that internal team communicate together through this entire process, and how do you guys streamline the communication when the team is so big?
Yeah. Basically what happens on the day-to-day, it's generally a smaller squad that we call it. It's the designer, the developer, and the marketing person all working very closely together. There's certainly lots of other people that are involved in that process. There's the technical team, there's materials, there might be costing. We try to have everybody holding hands at the squad level through the process to make those decisions. Then when we get to those key milestone reviews, where you're bringing in leadership and more people to the table, that's when it starts to get communicated out on a larger level and more opinions start coming in, and that can sometimes slow down the process. But that's generally how it goes. It's the smaller squads making the decisions based on the milestones. Like the milestones are where that larger alignment happens. Yeah.
Okay. And then on communicating with the manufacturer, like once you have a design or a sample that you want to mock up, like what types of like CADs or like softwares, or what is that process that you use for communicating the idea to getting the physical thing made?
Yeah, so the design team, they'll do their design files, right? Those where they work on their designs. Once they hand that over to development, especially on the toolings, which are the bottom parts, that's where you have technical people, or at least at the larger companies, you'll have technical people, a tooling manager, who will work directly with the factories to get those files translated into the software that the factories use. And then the back and forth starts there, right? Where you might be shaving millimeters off here and there, or adding different heights or thicknesses to it. And, this is where the feedback comes in, like, oh, this won't work. The sidewall height is too tall. It's going to have flex issues. We might need to do this. So there's a whole back and forth that has to happen, especially on the tooling side, because that's where a huge investment comes in building footwear. When you actually have to cut steel, is what we call it, for creating toolings, right? And those cost, thousands of dollars per size. So if you think of a full size run of products, if you're going to do, let's say from a youth size all the way up to some of the larger sizes, like 17s and 18s and half sizes in between, you can imagine the investment to open those sizes and tooling. So you want to make sure that it's right. That's why all those iterations happen early on.
Right. And so, can you speak to on like, is there like a computer mock-up or like, is it a lot of drawings? Like, where are you making how, like, what medium are you making the adjustments in? Like, when you're going back and forth with the factory, shaving off millimeters here and there, like, is that like something that's done on the computer? Is that the designers drawing it? Like, is that you from production making the decision?
It's definitely a collaborative process. I mean, in the softwares, like the designer will work with the tooling manager to make those updates. But what we also do is we have checkpoints where we use 3D printing, right?
Mm,
So when we get to a point where we feel pretty good about it, we will shoot that over to a 3D printer and get a part made so we can look at it. Obviously, it's not going to be in the right material or the right weight, but from an aesthetic, you can make a lot of decisions.
It's actually really cool that you guys are able to do that. Um,
It takes about about a day to get a 3D part printed.
is that like all those tools? Do you guys like? I have a feeling, just for someone who doesn't know, is that internally like at Adidas, do they have like big internal 3D printers? That's really cool.
We have sample rooms, right? So
Yeah.
so this is a another way to get your prototypes built, right? So you have sample rooms that'll have lasts available. They'll have tooling parts, like if you think of a superstar, like we can have those parts available, right? So if you
Right.
wanted to do an iteration of a superstar, you could actually use the parts to build one. But if you wanted to see how your new design is coming along, this is where you would 3D print your part, and you could have your upper also made in the sample room, and you could put it together roughly to get a really good indication of how it's coming in. And it saves a lot of time, right? Because again, you don't have to send it to the factory, hope they have the right materials on hand, build it, and then ship it back, which can take a week, or even now with COVID and all these challenges, it's sometimes taking even longer, 2, 3 weeks. So
Right.
it's a really useful tool. But again, you're competing with different groups within the company. Everybody's wanting to use these resources. So it's absolutely a tool that we use in the seasonal process to do the early reviewing of prototypes.
that's really cool. Like 3D printing is like very intriguing to me of just like I think it has so much potential as a process of how it can change the way that we develop literally everything. Like buildings, clothes, shoes, everything. But I wanted to get like some more of your thoughts on 3D printing shoes because you said that you use it a lot for the sample process, but obviously you could potentially 3D print shoes like that you're bringing out to market. Like, what do you think about using 3D printing as like the main method of producing the shoes?
I mean, it's an interesting concept. Um, is it something that we would go to in the future? Mm-hmm. With technology, I mean, where technology is today compared to what we got 20 years ago, I mean, it's night and day. So, I
Mm,
mean, I definitely think I would say never. Um, how scalable it is, how comfortable, how unique. I don't know. I'm sure that there's limitations, right? Um, but I do think that there's potential for it, absolutely.
That's yeah. One of the first questions that kind of popped up in my mind was like when you were saying the huge investment that goes into when you want to make a full size run of something. Like I feel like that's something 3D printing could help with. Where like if you were gonna make that same investment in a full size run, you can make that investment in this 3D printing machine that can make all the sizes, that type of thing. And then also, I don't know, could you maybe speak on like just the materials cost that goes into it and how that may differ going like 3D print versus traditional manufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, I can't get too deep into it because, again, the materials that we're using today to 3D print shoes for sampling purposes, they're not wearable, right? Like they'll break. So if you think about carbon though, for an example, how we use carbon on some of our running shoes, those are printed outsoles. I know that there's challenges. I mean, I haven't worked on those products specifically, but I know that there is challenges when you think about sizing and how big they can make the products. Like there's definitely limitations, and I think hurdles that the industry would have to overcome. But I mean, we're absolutely doing it. If you look at carbon as the example, right? But there's going to be limitations into terms of what can be done with it, and it's expensive. Um,
Okay. So after 3D printing, what do you think or consider is the most difficult part in the process of making shoes?
you know, honestly, I worked with someone a few years ago, and he was famous for saying, "It's just shoes and t-shirts, folks. It's just shoes and t-shirts." I think the biggest challenge to getting product to market is oftentimes the internal processes that we have at large companies. It's
Mm,
the alignment, it's multiple opinions, it's
Mm-hmm.
the business complexity really that oftentimes is the hardest, right? Um, and it's no fault of anyone or these companies. It's just how we work as a company to get aligned and make those decisions. And the more people that you bring in to making those decisions, the more it slows the process down. Um, and I've seen that at both Nike and Adidas. I mean, it's just kind of the nature of the beast. When we are quick and when things happen quickly and efficiently, it's when everybody is in the room making decisions together and everyone is aligned. And that's a beautiful thing when that happens. But it really takes that kind of laser focus um, and commitment from the cross-functional teams to do that.
right. Okay. And what do you know that differs in the process of manufacturing shoes at, well, first I'll ask shoes versus clothes, and then I want to ask at a large scale versus a small scale. Like, what is the difference in the manufacturing process, the development process?
Yeah, shoes and apparel is not one I can dive too deeply into, other than they're very different. Like the process is similar, but the actual ways to get it done is very different. And apparel has really long material lead times for the gray goods, right? So I think that's part probably one of the complexities on the apparel side that we don't face in the same way for footwear. But if you're talking about large scale mass production compared to um, smaller production or smaller quantities, um, it's interesting because I think mass scale production has a lot of advantages in terms of like they really adopt lean manufacturing and simplifying things and setting up lines and um, they can produce massive amount of pairs a day in a month. Like it's really amazing to see the things that can be done at that scale. Um, when you're talking about smaller quantities, they can be done on a sample line. You don't need to have a massive factory to be able to do that. They have much smaller factories that can support that, right? Um, but you don't always know what you're getting. I think with a lot of these large factories that we work with, they've all been vetted and you know how they're treating their employees and um, It's just night and day. I've seen both. I've seen really large factories and I've seen small factories, and ones that I've walked into where I'm like, wow, like this. Okay, this is a factory. So it's a very different experience. I think I don't know if that answers the question, but um, small production runs can be done on sample lines. They don't have to be done in these massive manufacturing lines, because if you think about what has to happen if you're swapping from one product to another, they have to completely change the assembly lines, right? Based on what the product looks like. So it is not just like, oh, we're just going to swap product today, and it's no big deal. Like cutting dies have to change, and materials have to change, and the whole menu, the whole recipe of how you build a shoe and how you set up the lines to produce them are completely different for style.
Yeah. So my key takeaway is like it doesn't really matter as long as you want to do it, really. Um,
Yeah, it
what
can be done either way. I think
right?
for smaller brands, there's a lot more opportunities, because once you get into a larger company, there's a lot of restrictions. I can't just say, hey, we have a new shoe and I want to go work with a new factory. There's an entire vetting process that has to happen at a large company.
Mm-hmm.
As a smaller brand, you'd have more independence and flexibility to look at other options, right? I'm not saying one is better or worse. It depends. Um, but you're definitely limited at a larger company based on the company's sourcing strategy.
Okay. So then I'll follow up with this question. So if I say I'm like a designer or a small company, take like money and company aside, like I have an idea for a shoe, what's the first actionable step? And then like what is the sequence of steps like from there? But what is the first actionable step? Like if I'm just someone watching this and I'm like, I've always wanted to make a shoe, like what's the first thing that I should do?
Potentially, I'd be getting online and researching small footwear factories, right? You'd have to decide, where do you want to produce? Do you want to see if there's factories in the US? Are you looking in Latin America? Are you looking in Asia? You'd have to probably figure that piece out. You probably need to determine what your budget is to see if it's even um, a realistic goal, or if you still need to work towards it. I mean, I haven't actually done that exercise myself, but I think if that's what I wanted to do, that's where I would get started, right? I'd start networking with people I know. Okay, I'd reach out to somebody and be like, hey, who works with smaller independent companies to build products? Can you give me a list of factories to reach out to? And then at that point, you'd start to contact people, and then they would tell you what they would need to get started, right? And the costs associated, and do you have a last picked out? As a smaller company, you probably wouldn't want to open new tooling. So it would be like, oh, what existing outsoles do you have that I might be able to use on my product, right? Because maybe I can't afford to do a brand new tooling project on my own at this stage, right? It would really be like, what's important to you in your product, and how to kind of start putting those pieces of the puzzle together to execute your plan.
Mm-hmm. Got you. And then it's kind of a small technical question. Could you explain a little bit about what a last is and why it's important in the process of making shoes?
The last
And I'll
is
say this
what,
real quick too. Where it
okay.
came from is I remember because Jerry Lorenzo is at Adidas now, which is cool. I don't know if you gotten a chance to work or speak with him, but I remember that he was talking about when he first designed the Air Fear of God one with Nike, and he was like, "I got my last flew in from Italy," which I understand as the inside shape of the shoe. Um, but yeah, you can speak more to that and like why it's important.
I mean, the last is really where you start when you're making the shoe, because that's what defines the shape of the product. It defines the shape and it defines the fit. So the last is really where the product begins, right? An Italian last is generally narrower. Um, it has a certain aesthetic to it. But it's really what defines how your product is going to look, what the output is. So it all starts with the last. If you have a last with a bulbous toe, it's going to look a certain way. If you have a last that's wider in the forefoot, the spring on the last, how it is angled will determine how the shoe sits. So again, the beginning of a shoe is the last.
And the last,
And
for
for
somebody,
somebody,
go ahead, Doug.
go ahead. I was gonna say for someone who doesn't know at all, right? It's one of those like wooden, or it looks like a wooden thing. Or at least I think like when you go to build a shoe, if you ever watch a video building a shoe, it's like the mold of like it looks like a foot with kind of like an ankle part, and you kind of
It looks like a
shape
shoe
everything
tree,
else
right?
around it.
Yeah,
Right.
if you think of what a shoe tree is like,
Yeah.
what you put in the beginning, it's not a shoe tree, obviously, but
Right.
it's basically defining what that shoe, the shoe is built around the last, right? So if it's
Right.
a boot or a high top, like the last is going to be a little bit taller. If it's low, it's just going to be like, the smaller part of the shoe. It's made of different,
Here's an example.
exactly. I was going to say it's made of different materials, right? See, wooden last, that was the old school way of doing last, right? Now you have these other composites. Again, if you look at the one on the top left there, those are high heeled lasts. Like every type of shoe has a last.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And so the companies say like you work for Adidas, like Adidas, you guys make these, or do you guys make the dimensions and get them made?
Exactly. So we have an internal team, right? When design comes to us and say, hey, we need a new last for this season, it needs to be for a slip-on, it needs to, whatever the details are. The internal tech teams will work with design, and we have a last department in Germany that helps to define what that's going to look like, right? It's a collaborative effort. And so once everybody agrees on the specs of the last and how it's going to meet a certain need, then we work with third-party company to build it. So Jones and Binding is one of the big ones that we work with. Promise is another big one. And they create those physical lasts that the factories have worked with.
Is it expensive to make a last?
Yeah, I would say, gosh, I think the last time I checked was maybe around $3,000. If I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on that, but I think.
Okay. Yeah, like roughly. Okay. Just good to know.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it all starts with the last. If you can have a really poor fitting shoe because of a last. You can have a really goofy looking shoe because of the last. Like,
right.
You want to make sure you're starting with a good baseline last.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I feel like we've gotten educated on how do you make shoes.
Right.
My
next kind of segue is into what are some of the most valuable skills that you've gained as a person, as a leader, managing these teams at Nike and Adidas and others?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Honestly, for me, I really think that it all boils down to people. I mean, it's knowing how to align the right people against a common goal, right? Teamwork. Identifying people's strengths, right? And leveraging those people within their strengths and things that they're passionate about. When you do that, that's when you see some of the best product, right? I really believe if your team is fulfilled and your people are happy, that's when you're doing your best work. pausing to celebrate the wins, right? Like no matter how big or how small, and that's something I really have to work on. Um, like to get a high five out of me 5 years ago, like you probably would have had to, you know, move a freight train. But pausing to be like, no, it doesn't always have to be about winning a championship, right? It can be like, man, today I came in, I kicked ass, and I feel really good about it. And high fives for everybody. I think that was a big one for me, where I really had to be like, it's not always about the huge wins. It's about those little wins that lead up to something greater. So pausing to celebrate that. I think just being able to learn from mistakes, like, you know, maybe this comes with age, being humble and knowing that you're not always going to get it right, and that's okay. You know, what's not okay is not learning from those mistakes, right? So as long as you're willing to acknowledge it and learn from it, like that's what it's all about. That's how you get better.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. And one of the quotes I heard recently about like leadership with people is you don't lead outcomes, you lead people. I feel like a lot of times in like senior management positions, we're thinking just this needs to get done, this needs to be released, this is project, blah, blah, blah. That's
Yeah.
always the focus is the project, what we're working on. And always to remember that we lead people, not outcomes.
Yeah, you also mentioned patience, and something I learned from listening to people like yourself who are veterans in their careers is you got to be patient. Like you even mentioned, like you basically were on the floor of developing shoes for 8 years, and that too. Maybe it's social media has something to do with it, but I think there's just a feeling of people our age, like 8 years just to learn something and then do something with it. I think our generation lacks a little bit of patience and perspective, and that's definitely something I get from listening to your story.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, I think just as you know, it's part of human nature, right? Like
Hmm.
winning and kind of getting to what's next and all of that is kind of innate in us. And to your point, social media probably does not help to that. Um, but yeah, like really just pausing and kind of giving yourself the grace and the space to become really good at what you do. It takes time. You know, I have people on my team that have been in development for 25 plus years. But this,
Hmm.
they have made a full-on career out of this. And for someone new coming into whether it's design, marketing, development, whatever it is, to expect to be great right out the gate, if you are, good on you. But I would say that it is a journey, and you do have to have patience because there is so much to learn. Like, yeah, just come in and be a sponge, like, take it all in, and ask lots of questions, and it's okay not to know everything. I'm
Right.
still learning every day. I feel like if I'm not learning anything, then I probably need to be doing something else. You know what I mean? Like that for me, that's what it's about. I need to be challenged. I need to be learning. And again, 25 years into this industry, and I'm learning something new every day.
And
Right.
learning is cool, learning is fire. It
Right.
should be no stigma of like, oh, it's cool to like get an F, you know what I'm saying? Or it's like
Yeah,
it's
Right.
cool that I don't know something or I can just look it up on Google. Like, no, like it's
Right.
fire to have information and like be
Right.
searching for it actively.
Yeah, and like Darrien said, like you were talking about network before, just like people. Um, and at the very beginning, you said like one of the main things that helped you succeed was leveraging your network. And like you said, young people, one of the best things they can do is come in and be a sponge. So, just real quick, I'd like to ask your advice for younger people coming into the space, how they can best be a sponge and show up and try to gain as much information as possible.
yeah. I mean, it's a great question. I think you know finding people to connect with. I mean, like, this is a beautiful example, right? Jay hit me up on LinkedIn and we just started chatting, and it turned into this amazing opportunity where hopefully I can share some things that you didn't know, and you've stretched me out of my comfort zone. I've never done a podcast. This is super cool. I was terrified, but you guys have made this a really great experience, you know. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. Like, you know, that's the one thing in this that I have tried to open myself to, is networking and mentoring and creating opportunities for people who are interested. You know, I think it's really easy to fall into this industry and forget like how cool and interesting it is to so many people and how many people are hungry to get in. And so I feel like that's my responsibility to give back by making myself available and open to doing that. And I love it. I get all kinds of random requests from athletes and people in school and, just wanting to learn. So I would encourage anybody interested to find people to network with and just, have a dialogue, start a conversation, because you never know who they might know. You never know what you might learn from the conversation. I mean, it's a massive industry and there's so many different things you could do. And you don't really know until you start talking, like, you know, what direction you could get led down, what path, like who you might need and what kind of influence they could have. Yeah, stay hungry, ask questions, like come prepared when you're going to sit and meet with people. Like, what do you want to know? How can I help support you in your journey? But no question is stupid. And I think that there are a lot of people out there that are, open to talking and networking and creating connections for people. At least that's what I would hope. That's what I love to do.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure, yeah. And we appreciate you for doing that with us right now.
Yep.
So, kind of getting up to the end, wrapping up, but I have a couple more questions. What I wanted to ask is, what is most fulfilling about your work?
Oh, honestly, it is leading a team and seeing them succeed. I think COVID has really, in some ways, been a blessing because even though business is still moving really fast and there's lots of challenges, at least for me, it allowed me to pause and reflect on what's really important. And what I've seen, at least with the people that I work with and the smaller team that I lead and then the larger team that I'm a part of, is everybody worked really hard to stay connected. And working together, and through that connection, you really saw people rise to the adversity of all these challenges and support each other. Like, it's just been a really beautiful thing to be a part of that and seeing people fulfilled even during really challenging times. And then on the personal side, it's really just mentoring and networking and giving back. I mean, I feel like I've been really blessed. I've had a really unique career path, lots of zigs and zags through different companies and careers. And I like to share that and tell people not to limit themselves. Like, it doesn't have to look a certain way. You can do it different and make it your own and find success within you.
Absolutely. Second and last question is, again, working at both Nike and Adidas, making the shoes and producing them. Do you have a favorite silhouette of shoe?
Oh man. There's a lot that stand out. I mean,
Maybe just even like your everydays.
I know,
Whatever
that's
hoodie
what
you're
I think.
wearing like every
I
day.
love a superstar, you know, I'm a shell toe girl. I love a
Mm-hmm.
superstar. Boost, they're incredibly comfortable. I love them. Anything with Boost in it is a winner. Yeah, I'm kind of a basic girl that way. I love an all white sneaker.
Fact.
Facts. Everyone
Um,
does.
but yeah, I also like to throw some flair in once in a while and wear something kind of completely unexpected. So I'm a little all over the place. That I think has been hard working in the industry. I'm super picky about my shoes.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess just like a follow up on that. Just like I'm just curious, like as someone who works at or worked at Nike and works at Adidas, like is there like any inner competition at work of like what's on feet? Like does it matter like what you're
Facts.
wearing?
Facts.
Well, obviously, I mean, you don't you wear who's paying.
Oh yeah. Oh, of course. No, you wear the Adidas. I'm just saying, like, which ones doesn't matter. Like, oh, you got the new ones, or like only they have some of the.
Or like, bro,
Yes.
your shoes are dirty.
Yeah.
Why? Like, we work at Adidas.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, no, I would say, you know, once you're in the industry, you're always looking at people's feet. Like it's so funny. We go to the airport, and all I'm looking at is what people are wearing, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
really? You pick that, or like, oh
Mm-hmm.
man, those are dope. I haven't seen too many of those.
Right.
So yeah, they're absolutely like I don't know if people would admit to it, but you're always looking at what shoes people are wearing, and
Right.
it's tough to get your hands on the limited edition stuff, even when you work at the company, unless you're really in that select group who get those shoes. When you do get a pair of them, you feel pretty special.
Right.
I bet.
All right. So, last question. What does different mean to you?
That's a good one. Different means to me. I would have to say that different is really the secret sauce. Um, it's kind of what makes you unique, right? What is your secret sauce? I mean, I think for me, I have really strong people skills, right? So I try to leverage those to get what I need, both in business or personal life. Like, maybe to somebody else, their secret sauce is they're a really creative person, or they have a really good eye for product, or they're an excellent project manager, or they can do mad crazy pivot tables. I don't know. I mean, what is your secret sauce? What is that thing that you bring every day that makes you you? I think that's different.
Well said. Well said. Well, Darrien, it was a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Dropped a whole lot of knowledge on everybody. Before we go ahead and plug yourself if you want to share your socials, like where people can find you, if you have a website, or just shout out some of your work.
Oh my goodness. This is the part where I probably show my age. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, DP8. But I have to say I'm pretty limited that way. So yeah, those are the two places you're best gonna find me. But no, I had a great time with you guys. You asked really great questions, and thank you for making me comfortable. I mean, I'm humbled that you would even ask me to join this. So, thank you so much for the opportunity.
For sure. Thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, guys, have a nice holiday. Thank you.
Thanks. You too.
Only real content is gonna last. All that other nonsense is here today and gone tomorrow.